Hey everyone, I apologize that I don't post as frequently as I would like to. Bear with me, I'm going to be more consistent with posting, and it probably will be just maybe like once or twice a week or something. I mean, it just depends. But I want to share a topic that I believe is not talked about enough, and I don't think there's enough understanding or perspective about this. I want to be brave enough to talk about this because I think parents need to have more insight about what's going on with this particular topic. And I want to maybe give someone the freedom to unpack some of these things that maybe someone have been carrying this and haven't had the opportunity to really just talk about it so that they can really truly walk in freedom. When we are keeping a lot of things within us, it is toxic, and it's kind of like a bowel movement that has not been released, and it actually can destroy your body, your system. This is part of the reason why people have health issues, because they're carrying things that has not been released yet and that has not been unpacked or discussed or talked about. This is a trauma that people don't really ever get the opportunity to be able to just talk about. And this topic of molestation, this is happening a lot more frequently than people may think. It's happening at an alarming rate, more than people would ever believe. I want to be bold enough to really share my personal experience, as well as possibly give someone the opportunity to just have this type of dialogue to release this. So I'm going to start off by sharing my experience when I was a child. And this is something that my mother didn't know until later, because I didn't feel comfortable with sharing that with my mother. And a lot of times there are children who they don't feel comfortable with going to their parents about molestation or rape because, for one, their abuser or molester kind of set the tone for secrecy, and then that child may be carrying a level of guilt because they have unwillingly or willingly, based off of the grooming. There's a grooming that happens, and they may have engaged into some sort of sexual activity sooner than they should have been exposed to, at such a young, vulnerable age. When I was about 7 or 8 years old, there was a program. I grew up in the Bronx as a child. I was born in Brooklyn, and I grew up in the Bronx as a child. And there was a program for inner city youth called the Fresh Year Fund. And it's a program that was pretty popular back in the day. I don't think they still do that, because times have changed and it's a lot crazier now. But basically, they would take the inner city youth from the projects. I mean, we lived in a building that had 6 floors, so we lived in one of those high-rise projects. And I remember, like, growing up, I mean, we didn't really see that much greenery. We really didn't experience another way of life. So this program was so wonderful because it gave children and the youth an opportunity to experience something outside of the New York City life. I remember distinctly that I was put on a bus, which all of the youth was put on a bus, and we were taken to the Port Authority, which is the area in New York City, in Manhattan, where they have the buses and the train station and all of that. And we were taken in the bus to the Port Authority for us to meet our families that we were going to stay with for the summer. So basically, they take the youth and, you meet a family that you stay with for the summer. I was taken, and I was by myself. I didn't have anybody that I knew on the bus. It was a bunch of kids from New York City, from the different boroughs and things like that. And when we arrived to the Port Authority, I remember seeing all the families waiting, and the majority of the families that was waiting was white families. A lot of the youth on the bus was Hispanic and African American. I remember when I saw the families, there was like families that had kids, there were families that had dogs, and they seemed so vibrant and happy. And I was like, I want one of those families. But then there was one family that was like an older couple. They looked like they were in their 60s. And at the time when I was a child, 60s was so old to me. And I remember just praying and thinking to myself, please don't let that be my family. Please don't let that be my family. And sure enough, when I got off the bus, they're like, are you Shemaya? I was like, man, I wanted one of those families that had the dogs and the kids and that seemed so vibrant. I remember thinking what am I going to do with these people, these old people? But I developed a really close relationship with this couple. They didn't have no children. I remember distinctly the couple's names. It was Sharon and Steven. And I don't remember their last name, but Sharon, she used to wear those really old dresses and pearls, and she had her hair, and she just kind of reminded me of Betty Crocker or something. Steven, he had really thick glasses, and he used to have his hair slicked back with gel, and he would wear blazers and ties and things like that. They just remind me of somebody from the 70s or something. I became really close with them, and they would take me places that I've never been before. They took me to Niagara Falls. They took me to all these restaurants. I remember this restaurant that they took me, it was called the Swiss Chalet. And I had all these experiences with them that, I knew that I would have never had with my own family. And so also I remember they took me to this candy shop where they had candy, shoes made of candy, purses that was made of candy, everything was made of candy. And it was just so exciting. So I've had these amazing experiences with these people that were strangers, but it was we became a family for the whole summer. And I remember they used to take me to church with them, and I used to have such a great time in church. And, they seemed to be believers. And I even remember they would send for me during the holidays and stuff like that because they loved me so much. And in their house, I remember so clear that they had a lot of clocks in their house, and you can hear throughout the house, tick tock, tick tock. It was just it was quiet, but you can hear a lot of ticking, tick tock, tick tock. And I remember one time I went to go see where Sharon was, and I went in her room, and I sat on her bed, and I was asking her what is she doing? And I think she told me she was praying. And then she asked me, she said, do you want to accept Jesus into your heart? And I remember thinking why should I do that? And I asked her, I said, why should I do that? And she said, so you can go to heaven. And I was like, is there going to be any toys there? That's all I cared about was, is there going to be toys there? And she said, you can play with the clouds. And I was like, okay, I'm fine with that. That's good for me, And so I did the prayer with her, and she was the one that did the prayer with me to accept Christ into my heart. And that's when I would say that it became personal and intimate for me, my experience with Christ. That was a special moment that I would never forget. But as beautiful as that moment was, it took a turn. I remember they were trying to adopt little girls, and they showed me pictures. Sharon showed me pictures of the little girls that they wanted to adopt because, again, they didn't have children of their own. At that age, I didn't think anything suspicious of that, but it didn't seem like Sharon really knew her husband, because during my experience in the summer with them, they would buy me things, that my family couldn't afford to get me. They bought me a bike, they bought me a dollhouse, they even bought me an inflatable pool, and they put it out in the yard. And I remember this one moment where Steven, he inflated the pool, and after he was done inflating the pool, he actually got in the pool and he put his arms around the pool and he was resting. And I remember his legs were, you know, spread in the pool, but he was by himself, and I was just kind of, you know, playing. I think I had the bike, and I saw his private part just swaying through the water. And I remember thinking at that age, like, does he know that that's happening, or is this intentional? Because the way he was looking was, it just seemed like he knew, but it also seemed like he wanted me to be comfortable. At that moment, I didn't know there was a thing called grooming, but yet that was what he was trying to do. He was smiling at me, and that's the thing about people who are abusers, sexual abusers. They want you to feel comfortable. They want you to trust them. They want you to be very familiar with them so that you don't even realize that you're being abused. And so there's this level of comfort and trust. But for some reason, at that moment, I told myself, I need to stay away from this guy. He's a little creepy. I had that consciousness or awareness and that intuition, even at that young age, to stay away from him because that's weird. But other kids usually don't understand that part of it because, again, they're usually being groomed and they're being manipulated to accept that person as the way they are. That was one instance that I remember. And then there was one day or one night that we just got back in from a restaurant, and Sharon, I guess she went to go do something, but we had just got to the house and I was asleep. And I remember Steven picked me up and he brought me inside the house, and I kind of was, you know, half asleep, half awake. I knew that I was being picked up. And then I remember he sat me on his lap in the house, and Sharon, again, she went off and did something. I don't know what she was doing, but she did not seem aware. This man started to slide his hands down my pants, but I decided to get up and I walked away. And I remember throughout my stay there, because I was miles and miles and miles away from home, wasn't no cell phone back then, at least I didn't have one to call home or anything like that. And I just remember just staying away from him, and more so staying close to the wife. When I got back home, I did tell my mother about that. And I remember, like, Sharon, she loved me so much that she would send me letters, and she would write X's and O's. I didn't even know what X's and O's was, but there was a sense of sincerity from her that I just don't believe that she knew that her husband was a pedophile. She may very well could have known that, but I just think that she might have been oblivious. And then here's the thing, there's a factor of some women or some people don't want to believe these things are happening because it's so dark and it's so disgusting. Some people can't even find a place in their head for it, and they just kind of go on and pretend it's not happening. So maybe that could have been the case, but even looking back, even as a child, I seen sincerity in her, and I hope that she found out the truth and the truth came out. I don't even know if these people are still alive, but I shared that because I want people to know that this stuff happens. That not only does it happen, we have to be real with ourselves and have these types of conversations because it can happen. And there's some things that we can't protect our children from. And I'm gonna tell you why. Part of it is because some of the abusers are people that the victims love or trust or are comfortable with. It's usually the babysitter, it's usually the friend next door, it can possibly be family members. And I've seen it happen. And it's always when there's a vulnerable point in someone's life. Like, for example, if there's a broken home, if there's a single parent and, the parent has to work or something like that. And then, for example, like when a parent feels like they need a break or something, and then they have someone watch their child, and then, you think you can trust the person, and then unfortunately, you can't. This video is about awareness and understanding on how to be able to protect your children, so that what happened to me or what's happening to a lot of children can be avoided or prevented or addressed properly if it has happened already. Before that experience, when I would go and play with my friends, these things were happening with the children that was exposed to this type of behavior, that was exposed too young to promiscuity and sexual abuse. It happened to me with other children where I was molested by other children. And these things are happening at an alarming rate. And this is when I was just over my friend's house, and the parents had not my parents or those children's parents had any awareness. And I can tell how it affected me throughout my life, where I had to, have God to heal me and restore me from that abuse or the things that I was subjected to because of my environment or because of the brokenness or the dysfunction that was happening in my own household. Because this is not talked about enough, it's hard for people to take necessary measures and precautions if it's being avoided. It's happening in the church. It's happening in people's households. It's happening in schools. Do you know that some of the molestation that I experienced with children happened at after-school programs? This is about awareness so that you can take precaution and you can teach your children how to recognize the signs or how to have the conversation. I try to tell my kids about this stuff. Even if it's not happening, it's so important to tell your children about it so that they can be aware that this is happening. So that, God forbid, if it does happen to them, they will know and recognize what's happening. I want to be able to help parents that are going through this to know how to speak to your children about this. So not only did it happen to me as a child, and it happens to people as adults. Anytime someone is touching you inappropriately or touching you outside of your desire or your will or even your knowledge, it's wrong and it's abuse. It's sexual abuse. It doesn't matter if it's your husband. It doesn't matter if it's your friend. It doesn't matter who it is. If it's happening and it's not something you want to do, then that is a form of sexual abuse. This has happened to family members of mine really badly, by family members. I'm only sharing because I know that it's going to help somebody. That's the only reason why I share, not to receive judgment, only to be able to help. And the only way I can help, and the only way that we can help each other and others, is if we're transparent and we're willing to take the risk of being judged, because that's what we as humans do. We judge each other. But the ones who have suffered much or has had experiences, we judge less because we know what certain things feel like. That's where compassion is developed, is through suffering and pain. And that's where empathy is developed. And the people who empathize the most, the people who are more compassionate, it's because they've been through things. They know what something feels like, or they've seen someone that they loved experience things. But those who haven't really been through much, they don't know how to feel. They don't know how to empathize or have compassion. And that's why I realized that God allows certain people to go through certain things, because he knows that they will make a difference. And in order for people to really make a difference in the world, you got to have been through something. Because then how could you understand or relate to when someone is suffering. Honestly, for me, I really don't care to hear from people who have not been through anything, because how can you tell me that everything is going to be okay if you haven't been through something where you overcame? So this is the reason why I'm sharing this. I always periodically tell my kids or ask my kids, has anybody touched you inappropriately? Has anybody looked at you, or did you show yourself to anybody? I ask those questions, and it may seem crazy to other people, but it's because of what I've seen and experienced. And sometimes they're like, no, why would you say that, or whatever. They don't understand that I'm also trying to protect them from something. I'm not quick to allow my children to spend a night over people's house, because these are the moments when these things happen. Unfortunately, whether people want to believe it or not, it does happen, because all it takes is for a child to see a video. All it takes for a child to go be with their friend. That friend could have been molested or been exposed to something. So it's hard sometimes to protect our children from things if others have not been protected from those things, and then it becomes like poison. The best thing that we can do as parents is at least try to have the conversation and not wait for something to happen before we have these conversations with our children. I have been telling my kids this for the longest time. As long as they could understand, I would ask them, has anybody looked at you, your body? Has anybody showed you their body? Have you seen anybody? Because if I don't do that, then they're going to learn somewhere in the world, or again, there's going to be something that we can't protect them from. And then unfortunately, they're not going to have the tools to be able to stand against these things, or have the strength to be able to learn how to navigate through these circumstances or situations, because the fact of the matter is these things are happening. The other day, my daughter, she begged me to spend the night over her friend's house. And again, I'm so careful as to not let my children spend the night over people's house, because I don't want anything to happen to them. And as innocent as her mindset is or was about that, she doesn't understand. Children don't understand what the parents are foreseeing. Children don't understand what the parents are trying to protect them from. And sometimes the pressure could be overwhelming, where I'm just like, okay, go ahead, because I don't want to hear whining, and I'm dealing with my own things that I'm working through, that sometimes as a parent, especially as a mother, and this is why it's so important to have both parents in the home, because you're supposed to be each other's better half and lean on each other's strength, even when it comes to parenting. So I allowed her to spend a night over this friend's house that I perceived as like, wow, these children are so mild-mannered and they're so well-behaved. Would never think that they were exposed to certain things. I let her spend the night, and after I came to pick her up, I was in the middle of doing something, and I just felt like I gotta go get my daughter. And I left to get her, and I picked her up, and when she came out the person's house, she was crying hysterically. And that's actually typical for her, because usually she cries when she doesn't want to leave somewhere, or she cries because she wants to go somewhere. So that's part of the reason why I just was like, go ahead, But I thought she was crying because she didn't want to leave, but she was crying because something happened. And so, she got in the car and she said something happened, and she said, I feel so bad, and this and that, and she's crying and crying. I'm like, what happened? Tell me what's going on. And so she tells me that she saw something on TikTok, and they were playing a game, the kids and her, and then she was saying that they were doing things inappropriately. I'm not going to go into all the details, but there were things that happened to her that I know that she was not exposed to before, that the kids were exposed to. Because it seemed, based off the way she explained it to me, it seemed normal for them to behave that way. And it was pretty bad. And I was really angry. And I started to direct my anger towards my daughter, because I was so upset, because I'm like, this is why I don't want you to go over nobody's house, because I don't want something like this to happen. But then I realized that I can't blame her and I have to take responsibility, regardless of how overwhelmed I might be. And this is something I want to share with parents out there. Even if you want to break from your child, you have to use as much discretion as possible. You have to use as much caution as possible, because is it better to keep them and possibly, have them get on your nerves, or allow them to be in a situation where you feel like you're getting a break and then dealing with the repercussions of that decision for the rest of their life? That could be a possibility. I really was like, wow, I can't let you stay over a night over people's house. This is part of the reason why I felt that way. I really talked her through it. This is a tool that I want to give to parents. Take it from someone who has walked through it. If this has happened to your child, please do not negate your children's feelings. Allow them to express themselves. Because I have allowed an open door policy within my household, within my relationship with my children, even when they feel like they're doing something wrong or something wrong has been done to them, and even if they feel like I'm going to get angry, they still come to me about it, because they know that I have created that loving environment. No matter how angry I get, I have created that environment for them to come to me about these things. So it's so important. And I didn't handle it the best way initially, but then I realized that, okay, she has to be able to feel comfortable to come to me. I can't be so angry as I wanted to be. I can't direct my anger towards her. I can't ignore her feelings. Your child has to be able to have the freedom of expression, and they have to feel like they can come to you about these things, because if they don't, they will either bottle it inside and direct that energy elsewhere, because remember, energy is real. And what happens is when a child is molested or when someone is abused sexually, it's a transference of spirits, because sexual desires is very spiritual. It's very spiritual. And when God created this, because it was a gift from God, it was meant to be spiritual, and it was meant to be for a husband and a wife. He created it. So anything outside of God's will or God's initial intent or God's design, it is an attack from the enemy. It is the enemy trying to sabotage and destroy us. The enemy wants to destroy our children. It starts in the home. Everything starts within the home, and everything starts with our children. If he can get the children when they're young and have them have a warped perspective, a warped perception of this experience, it plants seeds and it will cause them to behave a certain way if it's not addressed. It's so important to allow your children to express themselves to a certain extent, because they still have to have respect for you as a parent, but they still should be able to come to you. They shouldn't have so much fear in their hearts that they don't want to come to you about things, because then it's creating more dysfunctional people in this world. And if we can prevent that at all costs, then the best way to handle a situation like this is to communicate. Do not wait for something like this to happen to your children before you communicate with them about these things. Even if it's uncomfortable, have these uncomfortable conversations, because would you rather be uncomfortable now and protect and prevent? It's a preventative measure or method. So having the uncomfortable conversations now will actually is a form of protection. And would you rather have that discomfort now, or would you rather have it where it's almost irreparable? I actually am glad that I've had these conversations with my children prior to something like this happening, because the way she responded to it had to do with those seeds that I planted in the way I taught them. And I try to teach them that God is always watching. I try to teach them right from wrong, whether they are responsible for doing wrong or something wrong was happening to them. they can still navigate through it. When the enemy tries to plant seeds in a person's mind of guilt or just shame, then it causes a person to not want to share or expose the enemy. And then they hold on to this secret, and it's like they live in secrecy about it. They don't want to tell because they feel like they're going to be either penalized, or they feel like they were wrong, or they feel shame. And that is also the byproduct of what the enemy tries to do through molestation or sexual abuse. If it happened to you, or if it happened to your child or something like that, you have to know that it's not your fault. We live in a wicked world. This is another trick of the enemy, is to play the blame game, because that's what happened in the beginning, in the very beginning, when Satan tempted Eve. He came to Eve first, the most vulnerable. There is a tactic of blame and shame. This case is not necessarily the victim's fault, but where the responsibility has to be taken is, as a parent, we can't make the child feel like it's their fault. We can't cause there to be an environment of fear where they don't want to tell, and then they take on the blame for themselves. They should be able to feel comfortable enough to come to you, to tell you what happened to them, because they, truth be told, they were the victim. Or even if it happened to you, you were the victim. You don't have to carry the shame. You don't have to carry that condemnation, because that's condemnation. God gives conviction through his love, and the enemy brings condemnation to wear you down. And then he tries to cause you to have secrets, and then those secrets causes you to live in shame. And then you carry that for the rest of your life because it's not released, and it's energy that has been transferred to you. So what I did is I talked her through it, and we're still working through it. But I made sure that I prayed with her. I also had a talk with the parent. The parent took responsibility. The parent apologized. And so I just want to pray for anyone who has experienced sexual abuse, molestation. Father, in the name of Jesus, I just pray that you would just heal, deliver, restore, set free. God, I just ask that you would touch every mind who has been plagued and who has been burdened with this experience and with what happened to them. God, I just ask that they would just turn to you and release it. God, I ask that you would just cleanse them, God, and wash them, and cause them to walk in righteousness, and cause them to walk upright, God, and no longer be victims or have a victim mentality. God, I just ask that you would just cause them to just confess and release all of the pain, all the shame, all the embarrassment. God, I just ask that you would just help your people to be able to have these conversations, God. And in the conversations, God, I just ask that you would bring restoration, bring freedom, bring healing, God. I ask that you would just wash all of that away, God, from even memories of the darkness. God, I just ask that you would just turn it all around and get the glory, God, and help people to use their voice, even as I am doing right now, to be salt and light, God, to cause people to walk in freedom and be transformed by their testimony. You say in your word that we overcome by the blood of the Lamb and by the words of our testimony. So God, help us to be able to testify, God, and give us discernment of how to address these things, how to deal with these things, how to manage and cope through these things, God. Lord, I just ask that you would give direction and guidance, God. I ask that you would just bring peace, and I ask that you would bring victory. In Jesus' name, in Yahushua's name, I pray, amen. I pray that no one will look with judgment. Judge unless you be judged. God is the judge, and no one is exempt from certain experiences, as much as we want to believe. And truth be told, I was looking at my family members as, how could they let that happen? I was looking at other people like that's because they didn't protect their child. But then it ended up happening to me. So you have to be careful of how you think that you are exempt from certain things. If anything, it's so important to show grace as our Father does for us every day. I hope this message was encouraging and helpful to parents and anyone. God bless you.